Welcome to the Southern Ohio Synod podcast. I am Pastor Tim Menser, and I serve as assistant to the bishop for discipleship, leadership, and engagement. This means I work with congregational leaders to better equip them for their roles in their churches, and I am preparing people of the Synod to tell the story of Jesus. I am so glad you have joined us for our episode today.
Greetings. My name is Pastor Bob Abrams. I serve as assistant to the bishop of the Southern Ohio Synod, and I have with me today Pastor Doug Schonberg. Welcome, Doug.
Thank you.
In full disclosure, Pastor Doug and I met in the postgraduate program at the Bowen Center for the Study of the Family in Georgetown, where we were both going deeper in family systems theory. I'm not going to try to explain the entire theory at this moment, but I will say it deals with how human beings relate to each other, especially in families and in groups. Is that a fair characterization, Doug?
Yeah, I think it's a starting statement that gets one
only
oriented to gets one oriented to sort of our point of view or perspective. Sure.
Doug, tell me a little bit about your professional background.
Yeah, so I'm a pastor as well. I had a congregational ministry for 25 years. And then just more recently in my early retirement, made the decision to go back to school. And so just recently completed a Doctor of Practical Theology with a focus of Bowen Family Systems Theory as it intersects with the theology of the Trinity. So I've been in the church for a long time, have watched it function, seen its patterns, and have been able to use Bowen Family Systems Theory as a lens to just understanding what was happening in me, in the ministry, and in my congregation.
What makes you appreciate the theory? Kind of what is the thing that grabs you about it?
I think it's a statement that Ed Friedman, who wrote Generation to Generation, made. And he said, family systems perspective doesn't create a polarity between the minister and the congregation or the leader and the follower. It's a perspective that understands everyone to be an organism together. And so rather than cause effect or blaming people in the church who we label difficult, it allows a perspective to see how is this whole organism working, and what is my contribution to how this organism is working, and how might I change my contribution, my functioning, to improve the functioning of the church as a whole. So I found it completely empowering, as opposed to looking at some sort of deficit within myself. It's just a simple question of what's happening and what happens when, and what could possibly happen if we did things a little differently.
So it's a way of understanding, in a way, the role of a leader.
Yeah.
In the life of a church.
For sure. And one of the analogies or images that has been very helpful to me is it's Ken Bernstein that I first heard him say it. It's like, how do you best understand a honeybee? Is it by studying the bee all by itself, or looking at the hive and seeing how the bee is in the hive? And, understanding that I'm not standing solo in my leadership, but that I'm part of a greater organism or a greater whole, and seeing myself within that context. It just provides so much enlightenment for how the organization's doing, how the church is doing, how I'm doing, what I'm doing. And that, as I said, just gave me a touch point to grow, learn, develop.
That's a powerful image. The honeybee and the hive.
Mm-hmm.
Can we really understand the bee without understanding the hive?
Exactly. And Bowen Family Systems Theory would say you can't understand an individual if you don't see them in their family.
What is Bowen Family Systems Theory kind of at its core from how you understand it?
One of the more helpful things we talked about at the Bowen Center was seeing Bowen Family Systems Theory as an effort at a science of human behavior. And so early on, I would sort of uh, roll my eyes a little bit, but there was a lot of looking at other species, ethnography of, how do groundhogs behave in their group? How do elephants behave in their group? And sort of coming to understand that species have ways of functioning and operating, and human beings are mammals. We're a species, and so this idea that humans have behavioral patterns, ways of interacting, ways of relating that are um, common to us all, was a helpful frame of reference. So it's that old comedian's line of, you're unique just like everyone else. So, you go into a church, and we've had the experience as pastors with a long tenure of, we meet, quote, air quotes, the same people in every church we go to, because it's human behavior, it's human functioning.
It kind of reminds me a little bit of the idea that there are some things that transcend culture.
Yes.
And what we're talking about is something that is common to all human beings in all places, regardless of political boundaries or culture or anything else. But it comes from how we are created, how we have evolved as creatures. Is that fair?
I think Bowen theory would say that's the case. Yes.
So, what are some of the basic concepts of the theory that we might be able to explore here for a few moments?
Yeah. So, with an initial introduction to Bowen systems theory, you'll come across his 8 primary concepts, things like the nuclear family emotional system, triangles, projection process, sibling position, these kinds of things. So there's 8 of them, excuse me, and any of those can provide a lens of understanding to the functioning of self, but also the functioning of your church or your organization. So using any of those as a lens um, can just be a helpful tool for understanding. We all know the story of the 4 blind people touching the elephant, and depending on what part they're touching, they have a very different description of what this elephant is or looks like, or how they experience it. And for me, each of the concepts is sort of like touching a different spot of the organization to provide a means of understanding what's going on.
Is there one of the concepts that's been the most useful for you in your ministry?
So the nuclear family emotional system concept is a concept that says um, you need to see the whole to understand the individual. So always having that lens of sort of taking a step back, or what do they call it, the 10,000-foot perspective, looking down over it to see the whole thing rather than me and another person or me by myself. um, Taking that point of view almost always leverages understanding for me of simply what's going on. The other concept that is, I think, critical, and some would say the most important, is differentiation of self. And the Bowen Center talks about that a lot. And the basic premise in there is that we have 2 selves in us. We have an emotional, reactive self. You call it the lizard brain. It's that sort of instinctive response that we have to threat, And then there's the prefrontal cortex intellectual response. And differentiation of self is that ability to tease those apart and have understanding of what is a sort of gut, visceral, you hit me, I hit you back, a kind of instinctive response versus, I'm having feelings. What are those feelings? Are those feelings, what is the merit in those feelings? How does those feelings help me understand what's happening? And then using my prefrontal cortex, my intellectual side to say, given what is happening, here is my choice of response. Here are the principles I'm going to use to guide my next steps. And the better able you are to sort of separate those two things and work out of the intellectual, chosen, mindful, intentional system that's within us, the score would say you're better differentiated than sort of living in that instinctive, immediate, reactive, unconsidered responses that can happen in us.
Does that mean that emotions are not important?
For me, emotions are signals, and something to be read, something to be understood, and something that are indicators. So it might be an indicator of past trauma in me, might be an indicator of how I have functioned in other relationships. This person in my congregation reminds me of my mom. I'm responding to her the way I used to respond to my mom. So it's an indicator. It's like, is she my mom? No. So how do I want to respond instead of just that instinctive letting it fly kind of phenomena? So we're never emotionless. You can't turn that off. Although I have been accused of being Spock-like in my ministry. if you get the Star Trek reference, the idea that because I am trying to manage my emotions, that somehow I don't have them. That's not true at all. But I want to be intentional in how I express myself. So learning those things, super helpful in ministry. So yeah, of course I still have emotions, but my goal is to manage them appropriately and channel them into sort of intentional, mindful ways of being with others and having the system function in a way that is helpful to the system.
One of the things that I sometimes hear when I'm talking to someone who is interested or curious about the theory is whether working on differentiation of self means that you are not connected to other people. What do you say about that?
Yeah. Is it a lack of connection to manage your responses, or is it consideration and respect and sort of valuing a relationship so that you're not just um, on the fly without consideration reacting to what's happening? Some people will call that authenticity. The unfiltered, unmanaged responding. You can do a lot of damage. There's many people I've hoped would activate their filter or become more mindful of how they are impacting the system with an unconsidered response. So to say differentiation of self is disconnecting, I would disagree. Um, I would say it's working toward a very intentional, mindful, considerate, respectful view of others that you are not just going to let loose, but you're going to intentionally relate in the best way you know how.
I'd like to explore this a little further as we kind of think more practically about what it means to be a pastor and leader or any kind of leader, actually,
Hmm.
in a group of people. The first question I have is, how does one go about working on being a more differentiated self?
So it's a life goal. There is no, hey, I made it. And I can tell you that there are days where my reactive self or my less differentiated self is in full full bore. Usually not a good day when that is happening. Um, but the one of the things Friedman will talk about with differentiation of self, clarity about your own goals. It's like, who am I? What is it that I am trying to achieve? What are the principles I'm using to achieve that? Um, am I able to make the distinction between how you are feeling and how I am doing? So some people sort of end up fusing. It's like, if you're upset, now I'm upset. Are you able to sort of give people the space they need to have their own experience? And, your feelings are yours. My response is mine, as opposed to this sort of giant pond of emotion that can go on. So that's part of differentiation of self is sort of respecting the space of others to have the experience that they are having. Whether it's justified or not is a different conversation. But if that person is upset or worried, um, that's theirs. So that's part of differentiation of self. And when you can do that as a pastor, you can be present and not succumb to sort of the emotional process that's happening there. And then just again, that ability to manage your own sort of instinctive responses so that you're not adding emotional energy um, to a situation. It has saved me in ministry many, many times, usually at annual meetings. Or where somebody gets up and asks a question, they're already nervous because they're speaking in public. They're energized because they're perhaps being confrontive on something they don't understand or something they want to know more about. And so they bring this emotional energy that is high, and it infects the room. And all of a sudden, you've got this very tense meeting on the color of the carpet that's going to be chosen for the ladies' lounge. So it's like, what is going on here? And so if you're not well differentiated, if you're not able to separate out my instinctive responses, that is the stupidest question I've ever heard. But instead respecting that they have this energy, taking the time to explain where the decision came from, acknowledging the energy in the room, these kinds of things. Whole thing calms down. People are like, that was a great meeting. Um, but it's the same meeting as every other congregation has. We all know about the carpet color or the paint color or the hymn choices or the whatever it is. We've lived all those places. But if you can manage yourself in the midst of that kind of emotional process and energy, and that's all work on self. You don't have to fix your congregation. You just have to work on yourself. And what you end up bringing as a leader is a new pattern for interacting. Part of my research has been on what I would boldly call a ninth Bowen concept, which is the leadership function. And the premise there is that a system will rise to the level of functioning of its primary recognized leader. And so if the leader's doing well and is doing a good job at differentiating self, generally you'll find a fairly calm and generally healthy congregation or organization. And if the leader's a highly reactive, poorly differentiated leader, you'll see some chaos. Yeah.
It sounds like this is a lifelong discipline. This is not something you wake up one day and say, well, I differentiated now.
Yeah. So you think of anything that is lifelong learning, music, fitness, it's food. It's it's life maintenance forever. Like, even concert level musicians keep practicing every day. For me, differentiation of self is like that. It's like, no, you're not there, but you work on it. You work on it every single day. And in the same way that you would run or bike or go to the gym or, eat carefully, these are things that are maintaining life, maintaining functioning, and differentiation of self is sort of in that category. It's not something that you um, cross a finish line and you're there. It's just ongoing maintenance.
One of the I like to collect funny quotes, including in the context of Bowen theory. But one of my favorite quotes from Dr. Bowen was that first of all, you can't really make any progress on differentiation unless you do it in the context of the family you grew up in. And the second one is a pithy quote, and he said, "Unless you can go nose to nose with your mother in a dark alley, you will have a difficult time making progress." What do you think of that?
So it's Lang, another quote, similar idea. Till one can see the family in oneself, one can neither see oneself nor any family clearly. So your family is ground zero of your functioning. It's where you learned your patterns, your responses, your triggers. And it's, sort of the primary context into which you learned how to be in the world. And so it is a great place to start. I would argue that it's not the only place, but it's the best place. And so, when you look at your sibling position as a Bowen concept in your family, and, we've all heard firstborn, middle child, youngest child, sort of stereotypes, but there's some truth to them in how we have learned to function in the world. Um, Emotional process or triangles. Dad would triangle me against mom, or, these kinds of patterns. And as you use your family to learn patterns and function and my responses and my reactivity, you can then translate that into almost any context. And so, um, for me as a harmony lover, youngest, but almost an only because there's so much space between my brother and I, um, I saw myself working that way in a church context. It served me well, to work on calming things down, bringing harmony. But that's also, I was wired that way at home. So I learned it at home. So some people learn, you know, firstborn, headstrong, confrontive, change the world by, calling out the world. Um, if you are wired that way, if you have learned to function that way in your family, and you bring that into the church, there's places that's very, very valuable in the functioning of the church, but also understand that can sometimes affect how the church is functioning. So the thing I love probably most about family systems theory is it's not psychoanalysis. It's not, what piece of you inside of you is doing these things. It's very mechanical. And because it's kind of got that mechanical pattern aspect, I don't really need to psychoanalyze anybody. I don't need to find out what makes you tick. I just look at the system. It's like, well, this is happening, and it's like, is this how we want it to happen? How do we want it to happen? And you can change the mechanics of relating, and it's again very accessible, doable, and makes huge differences for an organization. And for me personally, um, kept me sane. So,
So what are some things that you, in your role as a pastor and a leader, have done when you are in that annual meeting and someone does get up and comes at you hard
mhm,
about something that they don't like?
right, right.
What are some things that you have done to manage yourself in
Yeah.
situations like that?
So Israel Galindo says that there are two variables in family systems theory. One is differentiation of self. The other is level of anxiety. So these are the factors that can come into play in the dynamic that is happening um, in an annual meeting. So yes, there's my differentiation of self, but I would say that in an annual meeting context, my focus would go to the level of anxiety. And that's where I would spend some energy and attention. What are the things that bring anxiety to an annual meeting? Lack of clarity, lack of information, um, fear of public speaking, um, disagreement with the decision that has been made or is being proposed or recommended. So these things raise anxiety. My goal as a leader was to eliminate those causes of anxiety. So, for instance, if there's a recommendation that the elders and the finance committee or the maintenance committee were bringing forward, we had already met as a collective body together to go over the agenda of the annual meeting. Every primary leader in the congregation understood and either supported or had an opportunity to have input into that recommendation. So all of my key leaders already knew there's clarity, there's confidence, there is understanding of the decision. And now the job is to share the rationale. So if somebody raised a question about a recommendation, one of those leaders would answer the question. Didn't have to be me. So the energy didn't focus on, well, he wants this, he's doing this. It's like, no, one of the elders, one of the finance committee would say, this is what we're proposing, this is why. And so by dealing with the causes of anxiety and mitigating the level of anxiety, the meetings became informative, they became collaborative, they became getting up to speed as opposed to challenges and smackdowns of who's going to get their way. Changed the dynamic completely. One of my moments of pride, which is it's kind of silly, but it came to be that it's like we have the most boring annual meetings ever. I'm like, yes, that is my goal. That you are so well informed, that you have had so much information come to you, that you fully understand everything that we're deciding. And it's mostly just meeting together to say, yeah, okay. And it was spectacular. It was not like that when I arrived. The annual meetings were brawls when I got there, which for me as a harmony person, oh my gosh, it was it was really difficult for peace loving Doug to try and moderate those meetings.
But it sounds to me like what you shifted there was first how you function as a leader, what you focused on. So you were really focusing on your role.
Yes.
And part of your role was to address common areas where people would become upset or reactive in the life of a church, a lack of information,
Yeah.
being surprised in meetings with major
Yeah.
decisions. So you focused on really yourself
Yeah.
and your own functioning. Is that
Yeah.
fair?
But also the mechanics of how a group works. So
Hmm.
you use the word surprise. It's like, I don't care what congregation you're from. If you get into an annual meeting and there is a major decision and it's a surprise, guess what happens next, right? There's no human behavior, mechanics of it. You're in leadership, I'm in leadership. You just know that there's going to be chaos immediately following that recommendation or that proposal because it hasn't been primed. And so using Bowen theory's variable of level, anxiety is a cue. Anxiety is an indicator. And I learned in ministry to move toward points of anxiety because it was telling me where there is stress in the system. And it helped me understand what needed to be done as a leader. So rather than avoiding it, you sort of move toward those anxious points. And so you learn, I was young, but I learned it's like people get anxious when they don't understand something. People behave badly if they feel they've been excluded from an important decision. So how do we change our functioning so that those things are addressed before we get to the annual meeting? So using the anxiety variable to guide my leading was it was transformative. And for me too, because now I'm leading pleasant meetings as opposed to trying to referee a brawl.
But it seems like there might be times when people simply disagree with you,
Mm-hmm.
even though they know.
Yeah.
So how did you manage yourself when that would happen?
I don't like it when people disagree with me or are mad at me. But with differentiation of self, if I knew what my principles were, if I knew what the goals were, and if those principles and goals were being shared with the leadership team, with the elders, with the board, finance and maintenance people, if we shared those together, what that did was allowed me to, I guess, share some of the uh, dislike of the decision. So, you're not just disagreeing with the minister, you're disagreeing with the council, with the board, with the finance team. And that took some of the focus off of me exclusively and shared it with the leadership team. Now, the leadership team had to be well informed. They had to know what the principles were. They had to know what the goals were, and why we're using particular strategies to achieve those goals. And if they were good, I was good. And, if people didn't like what we were doing, it's understandable. Not everybody likes everything. But it was well considered, well thought out, easily explained, and by people that weren't me.
So part of your strategy was to not be functioning alone in a leadership capacity, but to diffuse some of the decision-making blame,
Right.
rightly so, to those
Yeah.
who actually or participated in the decision-making.
Yeah. So if we go back to our original analogy that, to understand the bee, you need to understand the beehive. Um, if your congregation is a hive of people, you as a leader have a huge role in how that hive is functioning. And so, if you as a leader are functioning well, are paying attention to levels of anxiety, are doing the best you can at differentiation of self to be less reactive and more considered in your approaches, if you are coaching for principles and goals and values as opposed to who's upset at the moment and how do we mitigate that, um, it changes how the hive is working. And for me, that was always the goal: is how are we doing together as a congregation, as opposed to how am I doing as a leader?
I'm going to name something that is a little bit of a bugaboo for me. Um, And a lot of us have heard this if we've gone to seminary. Now, if you're listening to this and you're not a pastor, just stay with me for a second. But one of the common phrases that I heard, and not necessarily by those who taught, but by others, was that we need to be a non-reactive presence
Yeah.
or a non-anxious presence. So
Yeah.
tell me what you think of that phrase, and maybe what a better way of describing it might be.
Yeah. So Friedman is the guy that, you know, gave us non-anxious presence. Um, and non-reactive, like the only person who's non-reactive is the person who's deceased, right? It's just like if you touch my nose, I might sneeze. Like I'm reactive. Like you're in relationship, you're in community. There is no not reacting. So I think Friedman's intent with non-reactive, non-anxious goes back to what I was saying before about that ability to parse or tease apart that instinctive response, the anxious, reactive, immediate, unconsidered blast back to what has come to you, as opposed to the measured, considered, intellectual side. So when I hear non-reactive, non-anxious, what I'm hearing is tilting your responses to that intellectual, considered, mindful awareness of what I'm feeling. Uh, Sometimes in my own home, I'll say the reactive part of me wants to say this, do this, and it's usually horrible things, cut them off, hang up the phone, call them a name, just all those things that are reactive and reflect anxiety versus okay, those things are happening in me. Um, how do I want to be? What is my a sort of mindful, considered response? So that is how I define non-reactive or non-anxious, is that ability to even just take a beat, take a pause. And it's like, oh, there's a lot going on in me. I am reacting. I am anxious. Now, what do I do with it? So for me, non-reactive, non-anxious is that ability to tip the scale or tip the teeter-totter over to mindful, considered, intentional, helpful responding.
What are some of your strategies if you have been hooked by
Mm.
something like that, and you are sensing inside of yourself that you might say something that might not actually be helpful? What are some of your strategies for
Sure.
addressing that?
So these are very personal strategies. I wouldn't expect that everybody has the same strategies. But my primary strategy is space and time. So if I'm in a heated, uh, high energy context, if I am able, I'll ask for time. Can I get back to you tomorrow? Can we pause this conversation while I think about the points that you have made? I want to consider them carefully. I respect, um, the passion that you have for this. But my ability to think clearly at the moment is um, is not very good. So that works for me. Um, I don't know. I don't have a list of, here are 10 strategies for you, but people generally know what helps them calm down and what helps them um, get a bit of perspective. For me, it's a little bit of space and time. So whatever tools you have in your toolbox for that, it might be, some people run, or, physical activity tends to be really good for, clearing one's head. If you're a creative, art or sculpture or, these kinds of things, anything that helps you tease out the difference between, wow, here's my instinctive lizard response versus hmm, what are the things that were said that maybe have merit? If I strip away all the behavior in the comment, is there some truth in there that we could talk about and move toward? But I need space to have that happen in the one-on-one or right in the middle of it. I know that I'm not. I'm just everything's so activated and fired in my reactivity that I can't. Um, I can't bring it down immediately. I need a bit of can I come back to you tomorrow? Kind of space, and then I will think about it and consider it. And it's like,
I
what are the merits in what was said? What was the bad behavior in what happened there? How am I going to address the bad behavior, if at all? Or will I move the focus toward the points that were made? That kind of thing. So that's me. You may have your own way of. Um,
I take my mother's advice and I count.
okay,
So if
which is
I'm
a
in a
pause, right? Yeah,
yeah, it's a
it's a
pause.
pause.
It's time. It's
Yeah.
emotional space. I also have learned to do some breathing exercises.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah,
when I get
breathing
a
is good.
yeah, breathing is a really good thing. Which
Breathing is good.
deep breathing,
Mhm.
um, a little bit of emotional space. Now, not all of
Yeah.
we're not always able to get away,
No.
but maybe for me, a quick retort is my most common response to being attacked or triggered.
Sure.
Um,
Sure.
and
And sometimes
just
that can be helpful if it's humorous and if it brings down the energy level to oh, look how badly we're all behaving, and you can do a reboot pretty quick.
yeah,
But it's the lens you're using to decide on your practices for engendering calm is what I'm doing raising anxiety, raising reactivity, um, moving us away from principles and goals to sort of accusatory language, character language. Um, and if so, what are the things that will slow me down, get us back onto principles and goals, get us into a conversation about uh, what it is we're hoping to achieve, as opposed to just sort of the frenetic back and forth reactivity that can happen. And I respect that it can be different things for different people.
when we start to wrap up our conversation, um, one of the things I'd like to ask is uh, if we are talking about leadership, the impact of a leader who is less reactive than the people around him or her. That seems to, in your understanding, that seems to make a bigger difference in the life of a church, in the life of a family. If a person who's in a leadership position is able to manage themselves better,
Yeah.
is that a what, is that a fair characterization of kind of, I think, what your understanding is?
Yes, I would say it is. With the work that I've been doing, sort of where my curiosity peaks, research I've done, article I've published is this idea that there is indeed a leadership function in human behavior in the system. And some interesting quotes out there from Bowen people actually. A statement like people function up to the leader. So the organization or the church you're a part of is basically only going to function as well as the leader is functioning. Um, Another fellow, leadership sets the average level of differentiation. So it's sort of the same point of um, an organization is going to only do as well as the leader is doing with differentiation.
So if we were to wrap up our conversation today without leaving people in despair. And really talking about what resources are available to our leaders in the Southern Ohio Synod, or anyone else who's listening. What are some resources that you're aware of that you would like to share, and that maybe we could also share online through our communications here at the Synod?
Right. So I came with two books that I would recommend after all of my researching and working on my doctorate. You kind of see a lot of what's out there. So if I was sending somebody to a book or two for the first exposure, one is called Family Systems and Congregational Life. And that's written by Robert Creech, Creech. Just an absolute brilliant first exposure to family systems, how it functions in congregations, but more importantly, sort of how a leader can work on their own differentiation of self and understanding systems. Similar to that is a second edition book called The Leader's Journey. And this is Harrington, Taylor, Taylor, and Creech. And a similar idea is, how do I, as a leader, continue to grow and develop from a point of view of family systems theory? So those are the two books that I would say, read these first, and then that'll get you going.
This does give me an opportunity to put in a plug.
Okay.
And that is, in the Southern Ohio Synod, we have a group of people who are students of the theory. It's called the Congregational Resource Team. And so if a member of the Southern Ohio Synod clergy or anyone in leadership would like to explore these concepts in a conversational setting, a confidential setting, just reach out to me at the Southern Ohio Synod. You can find me on the website, and we can also help guide you in these ways of thinking that might be a little bit different than what you've learned before.
Mm-hmm. And seeing as we're putting plugs in, I also have a website, Relational Systems Consulting.com, and I am happy to have conversations with anybody that wants to reach out.
Reverend Dr. Douglas Schonberg, thank you so much for taking some time to talk with us today and help us to, I think, step back and think about the importance of what it means to be a leader in a healthy way.
I appreciate the opportunity, and it has been a blessing and a joy to talk with you, Bob. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
This is Bishop Suzanne Darcy Dillahunt, and I want to thank you again for joining us for this podcast episode. I want to thank Reverend Dr. Douglas Schonberg for joining Pastor Bob Abrams for this conversation, teaching us all more about Bowen Family Systems Theory. This way of understanding our own behavior helps us navigate times of stress within our congregations and ministries. There are many resources available to learn more about Bowen Family Systems Theory, including the two books mentioned in this episode. The first, Family Systems and Congregational Life by R. Robert Creech, and the second, The Leader's Journey by Jim Harrington, R. Robert Creech, and Tricia Taylor. The Southern Ohio Synod Congregational Resource Team has all received additional training in Bowen Family Systems Theory. If you'd like to learn more information about what this team does, please contact Pastor Bob Abrams at rabrams@southernohiosynod.org. Make sure to subscribe on your preferred podcasting platform so you can catch our next episode. Until the next time we gather on this podcast, remember that we are stronger and better together, joining Jesus in the restoration of the world. Anchored in grace and scripture, we live boldly to share faith, embody generosity, and to respond to God's love in all we do.